This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. Your host, Harry Wilkinson. Hello, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. I'm Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks events, happenings in the world, politics, entertainment, technology, the environment, which we're going to talk about today, by the way. And we take a look at it all from a higher perspective, because we know that due to the ever-increasing amounts of information and ways in which we get our information, from our new technologies to our smartphones to our 24-hour news cycles, we're bombarded with information that is sometimes less than accurate, sometimes not really essential, and other times just simply meant to provoke or tantalize or get our attention in some way. And as we are exposed to those things, we have to find healthy ways in which to deal with them. And that means a healthy approach in mind and as well as physically, how you do it. Many people, as I mention on this show quite frequently at the top of the show, there are those that seek to disconnect themselves from, the media, any kinds of electronics or any other kinds of gadgets in which we are bombarded with those information. And as I've said many times, that's wonderful. Everyone should have built into their week at least some time apart from your gadgets and your screens and whatever. But for those, and many of them are spiritual seekers who are feeling overwhelmed by negative or what they perceive to be negative stories that have come across through the media. And many have tried to kind of disconnect themselves from that altogether. And as I say, it works fine in bits and pieces, but to use that as a consistent method probably won't work unless you're willing to, chuck it all, live on a mountaintop, and jump off the grid. If you're not prepared to do that, then you're going to be interacting in one way or another with what I'm talking about. And so the healthy approach that I talk about, and this is why I think of it as a wellness issue as well, is taking that step back and looking at these stories from a higher perspective. What I mean by a higher perspective is the perspective of looking at, well, sometimes they call it, what's the phrase they use these days? Meta. Looking at the stories that are being created in your world. And my perspective on it is a metaphysical perspective. So not everyone connects with that, but for the most part, you can look at what's happening around you as not being something that is happening to you, but something that you are a part of and creating. Because as we know from the amazing findings of quantum physicists and quantum science, what we pay attention to, what we react to, what we think about creates our reality on a very real level. And so as we are creating these stories in our world, there's a reason we do it, and there's a reason we do it for the experience. Some people say to learn. For me, it's more of a matter of, at the highest level of our being, that metaphysical level that I'm talking about, where we exist beyond the physical, we do not have a sense of weakness, fear, anxiety, drama even. We are connected. We are one divine mind, and we are creators. So, we create scenarios in which we explore different ways of being, different ideas, different thoughts, different fears, as part of the whole process, much like you would go to see a movie or read a book. If it's very, very good, you're very absorbed in it and you become part of that world. But you also know at a higher part of yourself that this is not who you really are. And much the same is true of our daily lives, although many people have forgotten the truth of who they are. And sometimes you reconnect with that through dreams. Others may reconnect with that through meditation. Some, as we've talked about on this show, may reawaken or re-strengthen the connection with their higher self through things such as psychedelics, psychedelic therapy, which is on the rise, and we've talked a lot about that in the show. It's where the concept of your small you, the ego, if you will, lessens its grip. And once it lessens its grip, it enables you to see more clearly the truth of who you are. And by doing that, when confronted with situations and stories and problems that seem painful, we put it in perspective. At the very least, at a practical level, if you're not into this metaphysical stuff, at a practical level, you can look at the situation, realize that it is a creation that is no more real than you make it. And you can also take a broader look and see how you have come through so many situations to get to this point. And the changes that have happened to you, what you gained from all of those experiences, how you have expanded. And that can help you also to put those things in perspective. So, as I say, this is not a religious show, so I don't dwell on religious ideas at all. We talk about religion a lot because it's an important part of our world. And also, it has to be over and over and over and over emphasized. As much as I can possibly do it, and as much as anybody else can possibly do it, in any format that they may be, may have a have a voice in, that spirituality and religion are simply not the same thing, and in fact, they often are working at cross purposes with one another. Spirituality is our sense of transcendence, our sense of connectedness beyond our physical body. Just as a brief description of that. I mean, you can go on and on about that, but that's what spirituality is. And science has shown that we all have a spiritual nature. We have a gene called the VMAT2 gene, which is the gene that makes us capable of having that sense of transcendence, having that sense of connectedness, having that idea of oneness too. This is something that is hardwired into all of us in one way or another. How we deal with it or whether we use it at all is entirely up to us. So enough of my intro here. Let's get on with our Summer Wellness Edition Part 2. We do this around the same time every year just to talk about the different issues that come up in summertime that may be sources of stress and the kinds of practices, from yoga to eating to meditation to physical exercise and mental awareness that we can do to have a successful and fun summer. Summer's always a stressful time for me, and it has been for many years. This time of year has always been a source of stress for sure, and an easy time, an uncertain time for me. And there's a number of reasons why, and I won't go into them at the moment. But I think for many people, summertime, particularly managing vacations and things like this, if you have kids and they're off from school, all of those things can be very draining, if you will. So we're going to talk about, as we started last week, to talk about the different aspects of this and things we can do. And also, I feel that we need to talk about something that's come up again in the news, because this is a topical show, so we do tend to focus on, news headlines and things like that from that higher perspective that I was telling you about. But this is such an important thing that I've decided that I'm going to do a regular, or at least semi-regular, segment on this program, and I'm going to call it Climate Reality. And I want to call it Climate Reality because it's time to stop using the term climate change, because it's not a climate change. It's fluid, of course, and things are changing, but it is a climate reality now. When you continue to use the word climate change, it emphasizes this idea that it's somewhere down the road, that it's not happening right now, that things are starting to change. This is not to give a hopeless twist on it, because there are things we can do to make the changes we need to make in order to deal with the climate reality we have right now. But it is to emphasize the immediacy of the situation. And I believe continuing to call it climate change or even global warming still gives it that sense of it being in the distance. Whereas if you call it climate reality, you know that it's happening right now, and it is happening right now. In the Midwest, throughout March and April, they were hit with storms and weather events that completely wiped out farmland. I mean, farmland that is not coming back. And if that's not climate reality, I don't know what is. So this is meant to be a positive show. This is meant to be a show that gives a higher view of things. And I intend to keep that as my message. But it's hard to take the higher perspective of something. It's hard to transcend something when we don't even look at what it is directly. And that will help us to come to an understanding of what it truly means to us. Now, from that metaphysical perspective I'm talking about, well, there's an idea of why we are creating this now, what it is we are trying to do, and what it's telling us about ourselves. And that's important to keep in mind. It's important to keep in mind. But before we get to that, let's continue on with our summer wellness edition here. So one of the things we have in summer, of course, is vacation time, if you're lucky enough. And vacation time